It's Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And today I am coming at you with week 3 of the Every Bit Counts Challenge, where I tell you what I preserved in the 3rd week of August. So let's get started. So like I have done in my previous videos, I have some things that I've been doing every week, and I'll quickly go over those with you, and then I'll show you what else I've done. Every day that we have coffee, we save our coffee grounds. I put them on a tray like this, I dry them out, and then when they are dry, I just add them to this canister, and then I use them in either in my vermicomposting or in my garden soil and for various plants that like acid. The next thing that I did is I saved some eggshells from when I made something with eggs, and then I dry them out, and then I put the eggshells in here. When this gets full, I will either crush them down slightly just to pack it full, and then when it gets to the point that I need more eggshells, or when this is completely full, then I will blend these up and then use them also in potting soil. I will put them in my vermicompost as well, and I will use them for my plants. Then the next thing I did is I had some tea, and I take the tea from that tea bag and I dry that tea out. I put it on something like this till it's dry, and then I put it in here. This is a compost bin, and I use this actually for my dried goods, for my worms, and then all of my wet goods or my actual food scraps I will put in a baggie in my freezer. And then when I'm ready to feed my worms, I will thaw those out. Actually, I usually thaw them on some of these. You can blend them up in a blender. I've done that as well. But lately I've just been thawing them on a few of these. And then I add in whatever dried goods I have in here, and then I have some shredded paper. So this has some of that tea that I had, but then it also has some stuff that I had dried in my dehydrator. When it's dry and the stuff that falls at the bottom, then I just pick up, and I've been throwing it in here as well. Some of the things that were in here was this, and this is parsley. I harvested a bunch of my parsley and then I dehydrated it this week. I actually pushed this down to make it fit. This is the second half-gallon jar of parsley that I dehydrated so far this summer, and it looks like I will have more, so I'll definitely have to get out another half-gallon jar for my next batches that I have. So a fun little fact about my parsley is I didn't plant any parsley this year. I planted some last year, and it must have gone to seed, and that seed self-seeded itself into my garden. So I have like 4 parsley plants that were in my garden. One of them was pretty large, and so I took it and I transplanted it into a container, and so I moved that container onto my back patio, but I still have 3 parsley plants in my garden that self-seeded from last year. So that was kind of fun. I got free parsley plants, so I will definitely have enough dried parsley to last me for a while. So then the next thing I did is I dried some dill heads. So I have dill that self-seeded itself in my garden as well. And basically what I did is I just cut off some of the heads, and then when I was dehydrating some other things, I just threw them in there. And so for that, I actually just use pickle jars. My sister gets pickles, and so she saves me her pickle jars. And so what I do, since it's already a pickle product, I don't care if it smells like dill, because that's what I'm going to use these for. I wrote on here dill heads 2024. I have other jars that I saved for the actual greens themselves earlier this year. So I just added some dill heads to this, and yesterday I was in my garden and I harvested a beautiful orange cauliflower that was definitely ready to be harvested, and this little dill plant was kind of hiding under it, and so I accidentally got pulled up. So there's some greens here and there's some heads, and I need to just dehydrate these, but I don't have anything going in the dehydrator at this moment, and so I'm letting it just dry outside of the dehydrator for now. Okay, so something that I've been doing every week is drying my elderberries. So if you watch any of my other Every Bit Counts Challenge videos this year, you will know that I have 4 elderberry bushes in my berm, and they produce quite heavily for me. So last week, this was probably about 60% full, and I harvested another batch this week and I filled this up. In fact, I had too much and I didn't want to start a new jar, so I opened up some of my other jars that I had dehydrated this summer, and then I kind of topped them all off. So now when I dehydrate more, I'll have to start a new jar. But that is another thing I did this week, was dehydrated elderberries. So the other thing I did is I had some sugar snap peas that I planted in my garden. They are done, and I had a few sugar snap pea pods that were in my fridge, and I decided I wasn't going to eat them, so I took them out and I planted some of those in one of my containers outside just to see if they would grow this year. And then the others I am drying so that I can plant some next spring. So I'm drying some sugar snap peas. So this one was kind of fun. I harvested a bunch of basil. With my basil, I did 3 things. I take all the stems, some of the leaves, and the flowering tops, and I put them inside a freezer bag and I freeze them. And for those, I actually put them in my bone broth, and I use that to provide nutrients and some flavor to my bone broth. And the other thing I do with my basil is I make basil pesto. My husband loves pesto. I have a recipe that I use that has walnuts in it instead of the pine nuts, because pine nuts are just ridiculously expensive. So I went ahead and I made a double batch of basil pesto, and then I froze that in jars, and those are in my freezer. I cut a lot of my basil plant to make this pesto. I couldn't make it right away, and we were gonna get rain for 3 days. So what I did is I cut it before the rain came. I took that basil and I put them all in water. So I put them in glasses of water. But while they were sitting in the water, I just so happened to have this white dish. It was sitting under one of the basil plants that was in the water. So, you know, they're not exactly straight, so kind of tipped this way a little bit. And what I saw was all of these basil seeds. So it dropped its seeds overnight, and then I had these basil seeds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save these, and I am going to use these to plant basil for next year. The other thing I forgot to mention with the parsley is that I dehydrated parsley, but then what I also do with parsley, which is similar to what I did with the basil, is I save those stems and then I put them in a freezer bag in my freezer, and I save those, and those I also put in my bone broth. So most bone broth recipes call for parsley, and so what I do is I will just throw those stems in instead of letting those stems go to waste. I just save them and reuse them to put into my bone broth. Another thing that I did that you don't see here is I harvested some carrots from my garden, and I saved the tops of all those carrots. So if you didn't know, carrot tops are very nutritious, but similar to my basil and my parsley, I will save my carrot tops. And the carrot tops, what I do is, again, I freeze them and then I put them in my bone broth, because most bone broth recipes call for parsley, carrots, and onions. And so I save my carrot tops and I put them in there. And I was able to get in a canning project this week. And this week I canned the recipe for crushed tomatoes. So my sister loves this recipe. She actually requested it, and I was out of this. I didn't have any more jars of this left, and I know she really likes it. How she uses it is she puts it over noodles, and I think she uses like salt and pepper and just eats it like that. To me, very strange, but she absolutely loves it. So hey, whatever works. So I made sure with my tomatoes, the first thing I canned this year was crushed tomatoes, because I was completely out, and she absolutely loves this recipe. So the recipe I used, you can find on the website for the National Center for Home Food Preservation. I believe it is also in the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. But if you go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, go to their website and then type in crushed tomatoes, you will find that recipe. So what I did is I just print it off and I make little notes on it. I mentioned this last week. And so my note for this year was that 16 pounds of tomatoes skinned and cored made 8 quarts of tomatoes. I made quarts because my sister said she prefers the quarts. Now the crushed tomatoes recipe used to be called quartered tomatoes, and they make a note of that in this recipe. It says, a high quality product ideally suited for use in soups, stews, and casseroles. This recipe is similar to that formerly referred to as quartered tomatoes. So this is now called crushed tomatoes with no added liquid, and that is the one that I used for this recipe. If you're curious about canning and you want to know more, I will put some links to some free canning guides in the description below. I also do sell some canning courses. I only teach the safe, tested, and approved ways of canning. I explain why certain things are unsafe, why you shouldn't do them, and I go in depth on all aspects of canning. So if you're interested in my canning courses or any of my free guides, go ahead and take a look in the description below this video and you will find them there. So that was it for week 3 of the Every Bit Counts challenge. If you preserved items this week, go ahead and put what you preserved in the comments below. I'd love to check it out and get some inspiration from you. Again, this is Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And until next time, happy preserving.